Hello everybody and welcome to the first episode of The Delight of Creation. In today's episode, I am going to try to create 3 photo frames for my 3 scratch art pieces that I made a long time ago. So I start with sketching the general idea behind it, now how I want to create it, adding a bit of detail. So I decided on making it in 3 plies, having a back, mid and front layer, and I also wanted to add a protection layer to it as a plastic see-through thing. So I thought about adding a ceramic wrap onto it for protection, and that's what I have done. I did plan to add a gap, buffer boundary if you will, between the image, the photo piece and the frame itself, so it does not smudge together and it doesn't collide together. And I kept it as the frame and see how much space I need for my pieces. So initially I took, forgetting that I need to add a buffer boundary, I just eyeballed the measurements that I need to take for my photo frames. As you can see, these are just eyeball measurements and it's definitely going to be off. And this is not just the only mistake that I'll be making in this, and I'm going to include all my mistakes as well to show that it's a learning process just like everything in life, and that I'm not perfect and neither are you, and no one ever will be. The other mistake that I did was trying initially to cut through using a hacksaw method. As you saw, it's not that effective to say the least, and even my angles that I'm taking are not going to be proper, as you'll see further down the video, because I have not taken any measurements. Reason being that I did not have a protractor to accurately measure out the degrees of angle that I need to take for my frame, and I was just eyeballing it. Another mistake that I made right there was me just cutting it onto my table. It didn't mark on the table, and then I realized I should use my cutting mat, so I did. And because I was kind of happy at this moment, seeing that they do look like parts of a frame, I just went along and cut 3 to 4 pieces as a demo to see if they really work. Going to soon realize that that was a mistake right there, what I have done, because the angles are not perfect. They are not 90 degrees. Heck, they're not even cut properly. Now, as you can see, angles are not correct. They are bad, they are obtuse. It should not be like this. Realize this. It's quite saddening to be honest, but you know what? It's fine. I can reuse these for my any other projects. Now I'm trying to figure out what I can do, if I can even recycle them, reuse them somehow, but no, there is no way to salvage this. That's fine. There are mistakes made. So, go again, and this time I have an idea. How about I use some bit of geometry, inspired by again that same piece. So what I did was just take a side, an edge of the piece, and measure out approximately 1.5 centimeter of width that I want in my frame, and then I took that 1.5 centimeter and made a square around it. Now if you know a square, the square is a literal 2 right angle triangles. So I used that to my advantage to create a 90-degree angle that I really needed by aligning the squares and getting the perfect 90-degree angle. So, taken those 1.5 centimeter measurements, and I'll soon even extend these gaps, these guiding lines, to create sort of stencil to further expedite the process of cutting these measurements. So initially I was hesitant that I might get confused with all the graphite lines that I'm making. So I planned to use a pen to try to highlight the parts that I need to cut and the parts that I need to ignore. It does help in a way, but further down the line I just ditched that idea completely, because then I was able to focus onto what I need to cut and what I don't need to cut. Another mistake again that I'm making right here is using the previous piece as a stencil. Now, if you don't know, what happens is that there will always be some minute disturbances that you have in the cut piece that you're making, and that's not ideal if you really want precise measurements on your photo frame. That's what I have learned. So me doing this maneuver of adding on and tracing the piece itself is going to give me improper layout of the piece, and I'll cut inappropriately as well. This is going to mess with the frame, as it will not align properly and I won't have those right angles that I really desire. But regardless of not knowing it and knowing it only in hindsight, I proceed cutting through and finding out later that it was a mistake. But it's fine for now, because that is looking really close to a 90-degree, perfect 90-degree. I'm quite happy that these are aligning onto themselves perfectly. And I do a quick check to see the 90 degrees working or not, and I'm quite happy with it. The results speak for themselves. It's a perfect 90 as math intended. Now, on to creating the next pieces. To further shorten the length of measurements, I was still continuing using the previous pieces as stencils. Even though I did use them as stencils, I still had to manually recheck them and make sure that the measurements were right. So in a way I was just doing double work. That again is a hindsight learning opportunity. But as soon as I realized that what's happening is just a repetition of patterns, I soon realized that it's better to just extend the overhanging squares that I'm using as a reference point to create my 90 degrees. Because again, those were just 1.5 centimeter long squares. I continue doing that. At this point, I also realized that instead of manually creating each and every edge of the frame first, I can just measure out the edges themselves at 1.5 gap each. And then all I need to do is just connect the dots and make those right angle triangles. And then connect 2 more dots, create a straight line. Again, using my scale, my ruler, to align those markings parallelly onto the straight line that I drew to create those perfect angles. This method really saved a lot of time, as I just needed to know and follow the triangles that I made to cut, so I don't need to redraw and highlight using a pen, saving me more time. So what I do initially is cut out all the pieces that I need for my edges as well. So counting from bottom to top, I need 3 and 3, so that makes it 6 for both the long side and the short side. So instead of making different stencil for the shorter side of the frame, I just use one of the extensions, just edit it to add shorter end, then use that 1.5 centimeter square rule to find another right angled piece. I aim to create projects that reuse a lot of material, because I don't like to buy new stuff. That's just basically waste of resources. If I can reuse resources, that'd be better, because then I just need to buy few stuff and reuse the old to make new stuff, which in itself is awesome because it's good for the environment, and it also boosts a different type of creativity. They try to maximize while minimizing your cost, which again is a really nice exercise for the mind as well, trying to find new ways to craft with what you have at home or what you collect. That these are working or not, I make a demo piece of like how it's going to look like, and I even put my piece in the middle to see that it's working, it's looking good. At this point I'm quite happy with it. I even put a demo visualizing the final product of itself, because again, remember, I haven't made the 4 parts for my shorter edges. Now unfortunately, throughout the production of this video, my phone would keep on running out of storage for some reason, and I had to manually transfer all the photographs and videos to my PC each and every time it got full, and it takes a long time, approximately a whole day, just to get the transfers done. So there's a lot of time jumping that's going to happen. I started at night and it has been the morning now. And in the morning I continue cutting for the shorter edges, the shorter sides of the frame. There's not only going to be the piece itself, I had also planned about adding the back panel to the frame so that it supports the photo itself onto the frame, that doesn't topple over or fall down or slide through the photo frame. But that's not, it only came in hindsight. That's why I remembered that practice is what makes it perfect. we won't never be born with the knowledge of creating stuff. That knowledge only comes with experience and practice. So whatever comes to your mind, just go for it, just make it. Because those mistakes, those are unique. Those mistakes are yours. That's what makes art art. It's not perfection, it's the small imperfections in it that make it yours truly. Now I'm hot gluing all the pieces together, and this is where I make another mistake, because I had used previous pieces as stencils for my future pieces, and this has introduced minor errors into the measurements, which give me a very wobbly frame, which is slightly bent and slightly slanted, which is just a bit erroneous. Honestly, if you look from far away, you won't be able to see it, especially when the art piece is inside it as well. But as an artist, you know that it's there. But it's fine. That's how it works. As Bob Ross used to say, there are no mistakes, just happy little accidents. So next, I take out the torn piece of saran wrap and take a fresh new piece to add onto it. Now the good thing about this is that the saran wrap is also plastic and hot glue is also plastic. So what I planned was to use the hot glue itself and the tip of it, which is really hot, to melt the glue and the plastic together, so it, while it's really binded and stretched onto the frame, so it's really like almost a transparent glass sheet onto the frame itself, so it looks clean as far as I can tell. Even from far away on my wall, it looks really transparent, almost glass-like. So I'm applying the glue, melting away the plastic and dissolving it into the hot glue itself. And while I'm doing it, I notice that there is another mistake, which we'll see unfold as well. Again, my recording stopped, and I didn't even notice the recording stopping because there is no indicator. So a while passed and I had cut some U-pins, some paper clips that I had, and were not in use for me. So I cut them and long side and short side and used them to make the back support for my frame. As shown, I just added those into the grooves of the cardboard because the holes were perfect and the paper clips were spaced perfectly as well, so I just had to add a dab of glue on each of the holes and just insert the paper clips into them. Now, taking the perfectly clean screen sheet, I added my paper clipped back edges of the photo frame. But this is where I made a mistake, because if I add the back panel now, how would I be able to insert the photograph without damaging anything? I overlooked that. That was my mistake. But no worries, mistakes happen, and that's how we learn. One disadvantage of using super glue or hot glue is that it leaves a bit of residue, so I use the scratch out pencil that I have to try to remove them, and this is where the mistake happens. So paper clips are quite stiff, so I had to use pliers to bend them, and the mistake of not adding the buffer boundary bites me now, because I don't think you can see it in the video, but it's slightly bent and the frame itself is very small for it, especially now that it's a bit slant, so it doesn't fit properly in it. Now I also forgot that I needed to add a back panel to it, so I hurriedly cut up a piece of cardboard with, again, exact measurements of what the art piece is to act as the back support for my photo frame. This is where a really big blunder happens. I need to reopen the back stubs to insert the back panel, and unfortunately I directly damaged the thing because I end up tearing the plastic wrap on it. So to rectify the mistake, I add one more layer of edges of panel to hide away my mistake. Voila, it's done. So I redid the wrapping portion, added another layer on top of it after cutting off the damaged layer, and then just stuck hot glued the new pieces on top of it, making it seamless. Now for the next one, I remembered to add the buffer boundary on it, and I added approximately 2 millimeters of boundary on each side and then measured it perfectly, or as perfect as I could, to make sure the boundary sticks in, is persistent, and that it does not mess with it in future. And then I also used the previous mass production of edges as well, instead of manually doing it and using the previous ones as stencils, because that did add up the error. And all the while I did check that yes, my 90-degree angles are perfect and they are working. Similarly, I added 2 mm buffer for the shorter side as well, doing the same thing as the longer side, taking 1.5 centimeter squares and making diagonals out of them, giving me the 90-degree that I need. is quite satisfying to see for yourself that one mistake and one project and one iteration of the project is all that you need to know and to learn if you're aware enough, if you're observant enough, and you have a desire to improve upon yourself, then you can always just improve upon your previous iteration again and again, and you will always find something to improve upon. And that, I think, is how it should be in life. Nothing will ever be the same and never should be the same. You always strive, take up that small piece of you, then try to redo it again and again and again till you're satisfied with it. Maybe you might revisit again in sometime in future. Because again, why would you like to stop? There's nothing as perfection. This time around, instead of adding these stubs on individual pieces, I assembled the back frame first and then added the stub pieces back. And this time, I wanted to paint it because I had this metallic set of colors, acrylic colors, that I thought would look really nice and contrast with my paintings as well, my scratch pieces as well. So that's what I did. I took the pearl black paint and applied it to the back panel as evenly as I could. And though it's not visible on the video, it's quite shiny, and I like shiny stuff. And remembering to apply even coats of paint. Apply the paint to the stubs as well, because I don't want to see the color of the stubs whenever I have to change it in future, if I even have to. Thing that I do right now is apply the coat of paint on the other side of the back panel as well, which again in hindsight is a waste of resource, because once it's glued together, that piece is not going to be visible. I did not realize this while I was doing it. Again, this was the knowledge that came in hindsight once the piece was created, but regardless, it's really a learning opportunity, and that's how it should be. Now, before continuing on with the plastic wrap portion of the project of this piece, I first paint all the pieces that I need for my final layer beforehand. And again, I'm applying it on both the sides, which is quite unnecessary because only one side is visible to the eye, whereas this other side is just underneath, never to be seen. So all the paint that I'm using on one side is useful, whereas on the other side is just quite useless. This quite begs the question, is the past self ever the wiser, or is it the present that always is the wiser? Or will it be the future self which will be the wisest? I don't have the answer. But I'll tend to think that the present is the wisest, because it thinks in the present, knows what to do, and learns from the past, makes decisions thinking of the future, keeping in mind in the future but not living in it. The piece is dry, and while that's happening, I'm cutting out the back piece for this particular frame. And again, knowing that it would be a burden to insert if I don't have buffer boundary on it as well. So I add a 4mm buffer boundary on it and cut it out, the longer sides, before I take a scissor to it to cut out the rest. Make it smaller so it can fit into the back layer of the frame. Now I added mid layer to the frame. Again, now I realize that I didn't need to paint the inside part of the back layer and the top layer, because I had not painted the middle layer, knowing that it's not going to be seen by anyone. So I add the mid layer, on top of which I'm going to add the plastic wrap, and I make notes, adjustments to the back panel so that it snugly fits in while leaving some room. Then I paint the back panel as well so that there is no gap. The illusion of the frame does not break from the small crevices that exist between the photo piece, the art piece, and the photo frame itself, from which you may or may not be able to see the back panel. I didn't want the cardboard to be seen, because if I'm going to paint my frame black, pearl black, I would want that consistency and cohesiveness throughout my piece as well. again another time gem happens, and this time once the one side of the back panel is dried, I think that I don't need to fully paint the other side as well, because all I'm looking forward to is just fooling through the crevices. So I just paint a big portion on the side that's going to be underneath the art piece, so that I don't have to waste or use too much of the paint as well. I'll be ever slightly adding paint just so I'm able to cover big chunks, big sides of the art facing side of the panel, back panel. Once everything's dried, put up the back panel, back sheet, the art piece, and the frame itself, and again do the hot glue solder to the plastic and onto the frame as well. Once I've applied layer and soldered the plastic with hot glue, I add a bit more and rebuild the hot glue to apply the frame, the final top layer frame pieces onto the frame itself, completing it. Then I just cut off the surround wrap and tear away the extra pieces. I'm afraid to use a knife because I don't want to damage the piece anymore, so I just use my bare hands and take the bits of pieces as well. Now, what I do with the excess pieces of cut paper clips is bend them again to make a hook, and then insert that hook after removing the rubber covering on them. I add those hook in the dead center, the long side and the short side, keeping in mind the orientation of the art piece that I want to see and display. And then insert them into the mid portion of each of the back panels to hang on my wall later. Now I do this entire process again for my last piece, in which I also added the idea of adding a little touch to the frame as well, a golden touch if you will, which you'll see at the end. So here, enjoy a time lapse. Armed with the knowledge that I gained from my previous attempts at making the photo frames, this one ultimately being the culmination of all the experiences. buy more clay, make corner decorations on my frame. I just take the clay, roll it into small, long threads, which then I mold into the decorations that you see. I don't know what to call them. They just look like very rudimentary flower-like decorations on them. Let me know if you know what they are called. I certainly do not know what they are called, but I just know the design pattern that they make, so that's what they are. I take the measurements of the corners and then just eyeball the rest of it. These do tend to be quite tricky to stick and mold together, but I persist and do them regardless. I do the same procedure on all four corners as well. And this is a time-lapse of that. Once I'm satisfied with the four corner pieces, I put them on a baking tray. This one being my muffin baking tray, the cupcake baking tray. Put them on as is with the direction and orientation in which I want them to be on my frame. And then I also cut out a back panel for this frame as well. And I do the same that I did with the previous one, where I applied one layer of paint to one side and only partially painting the other side. Now in this frame, I did not paint the inside parts of the back and top layer because I realized that it's not seen to the viewer. They will not be seen to the viewer, so it's better not to use my precious paint painting those parts. Once the fiber clay is baked in the oven, I apply super glue the corners very slightly because the paint does not really stick onto super glue that well, so I had to just use a hint of it on the long sides of each of the corner pieces to attach them, and I let it dry overnight, and the next day I could paint the whole thing. Meanwhile, while that's drying, all I did was made the plastic screen on this frame. So, just like before, solder the plastic with the hot glue and cut out the excess. The excess piece of plastic hot glue that might be present. First, I paint the top layer in a layer of pearl black. I coat it with pearl black first initially, so I have something to work on with the fiber clay, because no matter how much I paint it, has this very slippery texture to it, so the paint does not stick to it that well. So I needed to just have a base layer on it before I apply the golden layer. Use my acrylic brush to add the golden paint into the decorations in the corner, making sure that there's an even layer and that it shows a very bright golden hue on top of it. I won't coat another coat for good measure into the corner pieces, because a few of them, the pearl black paint blended in with the golden one, creating a darker hue which I did not like that much. So I tried my best to mask it with more golden paint. So this is what the final version of it looked like. Again, foam ran off. This is how it looks like on my wall, besides my Bob Ross imitation painting that I made a while ago. Thanks for watching.